Alright, hello everyone. My name is Legion, and this is a pretty in-depth guide to the offensive game mode. I've been thinking about doing this sort of video for quite some time now. With the large influx of newer players and the more servers that are dedicated to the offensive game mode in general, I thought this would be a worthwhile thing to put together. I'm here on an empty server. Just to give you an idea as to the general metagame, the differences between offensive and the warfare game modes, how those can differ, how I personally think as I don't want to say mainstay, but a lot of people who frequently play on offensive only game modes probably know who I am. I like to think that I have a good understanding of the metagame of this game mode, so just giving my thoughts as to how to better improve your game for both newer players and veteran players alike. So, first and foremost, I'm going to assume you understand the basics of this game. You know, how to make a garrison, how many supplies are required to make garrisons, what OPs are used for, um, what the offensive game mode entails in general. You know, you have to be inside of a circle in order to cap, unlike in Warfare, where if we were attacking boys down here, for example, you could be in any of these 4 squares. It is just the circle in this game mode. We're going to brush aside that and basically go into the unique parts of this game mode, starting with the default garrisons on the map. Every map will always have 3 default garrisons for the defending team that always spawn in the same place. There are a ton of maps or apps that you can find that will show you these default garrison placements. I highly recommend, even if you aren't in command chat, you know, you're not a Recon tank commander, squad lead commander, I highly recommend you learn these locations with an app on your phone or something along those lines and mark them at the start of every single game, because the default garrisons are by far one of the most powerful tools in the defensive team's arsenal. So much so that depending on the map and the placement of the second cap point, which is where the default garrisons are usually most effective at, it can be near impossible to take a point if you do not get rid of default garrisons. Default garrisons are very, very powerful because of 3 main factors. 1, they have a 10-second respawn timer, making them faster than your outposts. 2, they cannot be blown up by bombing runs, by tanks, rockets. You can only take them out by manually dismantling them with Molotovs and flamethrowers. I think that's it. And 3, they do not block you from placing an additional garrison. So if I were defending Viceroy, I could place another garrison here, no problem. And the default garrison here does not block me from having a second garrison right next to an active garrison. That makes defending secondary points incredibly easy for the team. Second thing that I want to talk about that is unique to this game mode is how supply drops can work in the HQ. Getting nodes up is incredibly easy in the offensive game mode, in that on the defending team, like we are right now, you can place supplies in a supply truck in the HQ, like I was just spamming the right click there to show you I can drop supplies in the HQ, unlike in Warfare mode. The only time you cannot drop supplies in your HQ if you are on the defending team is if you are in the last point. The road over here is our last point, so I would not be able to drop supplies in the C or D column. The E, F, G, and H columns, I can drop supplies in the HQ, no problem. Now, by extension, if we were on the offensive team, so let's pretend we're playing German offensive, and we haven't taken road yet, you can drop supplies from a supply truck in any of the HQs as long as you have not capped the first point. So in this instance, if we haven't captured road, I can drop supplies as an offensive team in my HQ from a supply truck as long as we haven't capped this first point right here. It makes getting nodes up in your HQ 10 times easier in this game mode. You don't have to worry about having a support, spam supplies in your HQ and having your engineers swap, or driving a truck all the way out to the 3 and 4 rows. You don't have to worry about any of that. Next thing I want to talk about is the general game flow. So ultimately, and this will be a somewhat controversial opinion, I think that the defensive team should win 100% of their games if you have teams of similar skill levels, for the simple fact that the offensive team has so many things going against them in this game mode, like the lack of default garrisons, like the fact that, for example, if we get pushed all the way back to the final point, road, armor, for example, has to come all the way from their spawn to get back up to this active point, whereas the defensive team can just spawn a heavy. They're already playing defensive because of the nature of the game mode, and it's so much easier to, again, if you have an active team that's working well together and calling out important targets. A single recon team over here at Code Brew Factory, for example, could just be marking tanks and making this point impossible to cap. A lot of the cap points, and this is a great example being on Foy, you don't have a ton of places to advance from that make a lot of sense. A lot of the times I'll see, a garrison placed here. This is out in the middle of an open field, but let's just say we have a garrison placed here, and then all of this is open field over here at road. So the offensive team realistically can move from this, let's move this garrison back here, like towards the trench, or maybe behind this building. And they're basically just going to be coming up this road. You can get, outposts down in the forest up here, but it's a little misleading with this map. If you place a garrison here, it's going to be out in the open. So depending on the map, the approach to defensive objectives is so much harder for the offensive team that if you have a communicative command chat, it makes defense, it should be a 100% win rate. I know it's kind of silly to say because obviously it doesn't work out in practice that way, but if all things are equal as far as the teams are concerned, it should be a 100% win rate. The ultimate way to win as offense is, and let me redeploy, let me swap teams just to make this look a little bit easier. We know where the points are. For the demonstration of this, I don't think it's so important that we're looking at all of the points. I'd rather give you a better idea as to what I would personally be looking at. So I'll switch teams here. I'm going to go command, and while I'm back here, I might as well just show you that I can drop supplies in the HQ in the supply truck. So let's pretend that we haven't captured boys yet. We're probably going to get a garrison here. We may not even get a garrison, just because this is all going to be red territory. We're going to be pushing out from our HQ. The recon teams and the armor teams, especially at the beginning, should be looking for the default garrisons, which you should have marked. Now, again, I know where all of these are because we were just on the defensive team, and we know where all these were just because we were just looking at the map. I usually just throw marks like, hey, they're in this general area, until my recon tank squad's like, hey, I need you guys to go flank and kill these. That way when we capture the first point, and you can tell I can drop supplies. Now we get rid of these, that way the second point is easier to take, especially on a map like Foy. Once we have boys captured, and we have all the default garrisons taken down. Our main push is probably going to be coming up this main road right here, right? So we'll probably have a garrison somewhere in the trees over here, maybe another one over here in the trees over here. Moving up, at that point we need people to go ahead and flank and get garrisons set up on like the far eastern side. We want this default to be taken out so that if I do need to call in supplies with a supply drop like I am right now, someone doesn't just spawn on that default garrison and take those supplies out. And by extension, we also need to keep supplies further enough away from the offensive point that the 100-meter rule for locking out a red zone garrison doesn't come into effect as often. For those of you who don't know, garrisons that are built in, let's pretend this is blue territory. We've captured boys. Locked unless an enemy is within 10 meters from it. Whereas if it's placed in the red zone, like it would be up here and we were moving on the midpoint right here, if an enemy is within 100 meters, it blocks you from spawning on that garrison. So, continuing this with this hypothetical example, we're trying to cap the main point. I want people flanking around, not everyone just pushing up this main road right here. Recon team perhaps either getting a garrison set up over here or also looking for where the midpoint is. Now as command, what I'll also do is I'll just send a recon plane over, because the majority of the time what people do is they just sit in the middle of the circle of the hard cap. And that's how most people defend. I'll send a recon plane over because I know where the enemy team is for the most part, and I'll send it over where the third point would be. It can be over here at the barn, it can be over here at the trench system right here in the middle of the map, and then it can also be at the house over here on attack mark. So I won't realistically get all of them, but a lot of the time you can see if there's a supply truck, for example, right here, then we know the next point's going to be mid, right? At that point, what I want to start doing is I want to start dropping my supplies deeper in the back line to prepare for the next point. And if we know where the fourth point is, even better. We might know, for example, the fourth point is going to be here in Foy. We know in this instance it's not, it's over here on the right. But if we knew that it was over here on the right, that might change where I want to have these supplies dropping. You should also be very familiar with what rows equate to which cap point. So I know, for example, the 5 and 6 row is always going to be the midpoint, 7 and 8 is the second, 9 and 10 is the first, etc., etc. So, continuing with this hypothetical, we want to keep moving the garrisons up. The red zone garrison, for example, that we place here will turn into a blue zone garrison when we move up to the next point. And then we repeat the process over and over, getting supplies deeper into the back line. A lot of the times, people who are actively fighting over the cap point aren't going to be worried about supplies dropping behind them, just again because of the nature of this game mode, unless the enemy team has a really competent recon squad, which we'll get into that in a little bit later. So this kind of gives you an idea as to what my thought process is when I place garrisons. I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about where you should place your garrison. That comes with just general experience playing this game. I'll talk a little bit more about how to get garrisons up, especially as a commander / squad lead in a little bit as well, but we kind of have a general idea as to how the general game flow progresses if you're doing things really well. Actually, you know what? Let's talk about garrison placement on the offensive side while we're over here, and we can talk about it. So, as I mentioned, you do want to have your blue zone garrisons. You want to keep them behind cover, like building right here, got another building right here, or there's a lot of forest over here that we could put one in. and again, a lot of this just comes with map knowledge, paired with the knowledge also that if we have blue zone garrisons that aren't going to get locked out, it creates naturally a bottleneck, so to speak, for the offensive team. People are just going to want to push from this garrison right here up here along a straight line, essentially. Very few people are going to want to flank in this game. Just because, again, we want to get into the fight. We want to go ahead and try and push the points. A lot of it comes down to experience, I would say, as well. I personally almost always flank. I never really push up the main route, so to speak, to a point. And I think that just comes with game knowledge and being a more veteran player. So bear in mind with your garrison placements as the offensive team that if you want to get better flanks off, so again, using the midpoint here, for example, I know that there are trees over here, just from map knowledge, that I could place a garrison over here in order to move on the midpoint right here. That gives me about 200 meters. And if most people are going to be clumped around here, maybe you'll have some people back here trying to, watch the flank. This garrison is far more likely to stay open. I might have another one over here, again, 200 meters away from the cap point. I may even want to put it a little bit further out. I might want to put a garrison all the way over here and have a team flank up through the 4 row here, come up behind and move into the midpoint that way. Now, if the defending team is building, or if they have a good coverage of the map, they have map control with garrisons and their squads, that makes this whole process infinitely more harder, which is, again, one of the reasons I think the defensive team should pretty much always win. Because I have a feeling I'm going to yap on for another 13 plus minutes, let's drive up here real quick and just cap the point, buy some extra time. While I'm driving up here, hopefully you can hear me okay over the sound of this truck. Let's talk briefly about flanking. I did just mention that I personally flank more often than not. I don't really get up into the meat grinder. Let's hop out of the truck here just so you don't have to worry about that being too loud. And I also briefly illustrated a good way to flank. What I see a lot of people doing is, we'll have our garrison here, we're trying to take the midpoint, and people will just kind of walk out here and try and flank around, and that's so very easy to get detected. An efficient flank in this game, and I know other people have made far better videos about this than I will. I don't want to spend too much time on this. The wider the flank, the more likely it is to succeed. So again, using this example we've been talking about, why not get an outpost? It could be a garrison that we had, because again, we wanted a blue zone garrison over here, we wanted a blue zone garrison over here, we maybe wanted one over here because we weren't sure where the third point is. And if we know the next point is middle, then why don't we go up all the way up here? Maybe we go even further back into the 4 row as far as we can without getting out of bounds or out of combat, so you don't get killed, and try and come up behind the enemy. The important thing about flanking, and I see this happen all the time, especially when I use airheads, if you are behind the enemy team and they do not know that you are back there currently, your number one priority should be, one, assuming that it's not the second point here and we're looking for a default garrison, which we know is right here. Again, using the third point up here as our demonstration. If you somehow manage to get all the way back here, right, and you still haven't been seen, you got an OP up maybe over here, or you have an OP up over here in the 5 row, because that's where you'd be able to place it as a squad lead unless you're Recon. You should not be engaging people who are not looking at you. If the enemy team has people, more often than not, they're going to be looking at the main push, which is going to be coming up this road like we mentioned before. you should not be shooting them in the back from 200 meters away in this building. What you should do is you should be moving up, having trigger discipline, getting as close to the enemy as you can, and finding their spawns. Again, I think this comes down to just general knowledge as to how best to play this game in general. A lot of people fall into the, I don't like to say noob trap, but it is a noob trap, that kills are more important than killing spawns. If you remove the enemy spawn and they only have a backup garrison and it's not on point, you have an infinitely better chance of capping the point than you do if you killed, you know, 2 full squads just by plinking away at them from 200 meters away back here. Get up close, find their spawns, mark their spawn if you can, and even if you die, oftentimes that's enough for a tank to get an HE shell onto that garrison, or the commander to call in a bombing run to destroy that garrison. So that's my little rant about flanking. Another benefit of flanking is it also helps you get up flanking garrisons pretty sneakily. If you know how to do a support swap, that's basically just you and 2 other people in your squad. If you're the squad lead, one support spawns in, he drops his 50 supplies right here in the red. You hit him in the head with a shovel or ask him to redeploy. Other guy comes in, drops his 50 supplies, bam, you have a garrison behind them. There's no parachute coming down screaming, hey, there's a garrison back here, come and attack me, or there's no big loud supply truck, which oftentimes is better than the parachute coming down with supplies, but also can get spotted fairly easily. Now let's talk about garrisons on the defensive side. Your main job as the defensive team, if you're a squad lead command, should be making sure that you have as much map control as possible. So we know that the default garrison is basically right here. Maybe we built another one right here, so we have the ability to put, you know, one right here. We could put another one maybe over here. We could even move this one back a little bit. So fun fact, myth that has been around for a very long time is that command garrisons take longer to dismantle than other garrisons. That's not true. So you know, I still hear this to this day. So if we're attacking the second point, the active rows are 7 and 8. Think of it that way. So any garrison built in the 5 or 6 row, which you're able to go back as the offensive team, if you try and dismantle a garrison in the 5 or 6 row, that's when you'll have the long dismantle time. It has nothing to do with whether a command has built it or not. It's just where the garrison is placed. So again, got sidetracked. So we probably would want to put a garrison back here just so it takes longer for the offensive team to dismantle that garrison. We could have another one, say probably around here on the move mark, and bam, 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 bam. We have 5 garrisons all neatly tucked around Viceroy. We could have a squad over here watching the flank over here, squad over here making sure they don't get around behind us, another squad, maybe a recon team over here or a recon team over here, watching the flank over here from the east, and then everyone else gets to do the fun part and just shoot the infantry running up the road because they can't get a spawn. The offensive team can't get a spawn except for, you know, over here on the call artillery mark or over here on the call smoke mark, which makes map control much harder for the offensive team, especially because the blue zone garrisons are the only safe garrisons, whereas a guy over here is going to be blocking out this garrison, a guy over here is going to be blocking out this garrison. He may not even know it exists, but just by being in the area, he's blocking that garrison from being useful. So we've talked a little bit about garrison placements, how the offensive defensive game tends to progress. Let's talk a little bit about each role and their mode. By and large, I'm going to keep everything to both the offensive and defensive team is going to be applicable to all of these roles just for simplicity's sake. I have by far the most experience in the command slash squad lead chair, so we'll start with that. As command, and by an extension squad lead, I definitely don't think it's as necessary in this game mode, but especially as command, your only job should be building garrisons. I don't care if you don't call in a bombing run for the entirety of the map or the entirety of the game. If you are building garrisons and you're driving around in a supply truck, you are infinitely more useful as a command than someone who sits in the HQ and just calls in bombing runs every once in a while, and also tells people what to do. Yes, having a game plan is important, but a vast majority of people understand, hey, I need to attack Viceroy. It's not much more complicated than that. And oftentimes I don't hear command particular squads, hey, I want you to flank on the east side. It doesn't really get that advanced as far as, commanding your team. So, build garrisons, use bombing runs when your team is in a good enough position to push the point. I can't tell you how many times I'll see a command, call Recon plane over Viceroy. He sees a whole bunch of red dots. He gets really excited and calls in a bombing run. He's like, yeah, I just killed 20 people with that bombing run. And his team is still all the way down here, and they can't make anything out of that bombing run push. Bombing runs should also almost always be used in tandem with an airhead, because in order to make an airhead somewhat useful, it needs to be used in tandem with a bombing run. I have moved away from airhead bombing runs. I'll demonstrate how to do it just so you're aware. So let's say I call in an airhead. I'm going to queue up a bombing run on top of the airhead. And when the circle is about halfway through, I'll call a bombing run in with the beginning of the bombing run starting on top of the airhead. And what that will do is, if you put it just before the circle is half full, the first bombs will drop on the airhead as soon as the airhead is touching down on the ground, which makes it far more likely to survive. The problem with this is, if you have a competent enemy team, they're going to be fully aware of this tactic and probably just stand away from the airhead and wait for the bombs to fall. You can also call in a strafing run to try and cover the airhead as well in tandem with it. I would call in the strafing run about a little bit more than 3/4 full. So as you can see right now, the bombing run's coming in. I probably called in a smidge too early. Airhead touchdown, and then the bombs drop. So a little bit before 3/4 full for the strafing run, for the circle for the airhead is when I would call that in, and you'll get a good clear on the airhead with a strafing run. The other thing I started using way more often than that sort of airhead is I'll call in the airhead, and I'll call in a bombing run first, and about halfway through, about a quarter way through the circle of the bombing run, so it's at the 3 o'clock position, I'll call in an airhead somewhere else. And what that will do is, by the time you hear the plane of the airhead, it'll be masked by the sound of the bombing run going over. I hope I explained that correctly. My apologies for not getting that correct the first time. So that's main job is command, airheads, bombing runs, build garrisons. That's the strafing runs should pretty much never be used for anything other than clearing garrisons. So especially as a defensive commander, again, one of the reasons it's so hard to take map control away from the defending team is the long defuse time or dismantle time. On defensive airheads, you just call in a strafing run over your garrison and it'll clear it. If you are actively looking at your blue zone garrison and it goes red, I would go ahead and queue up a strafing run on it. As soon as it turns red, call it in. Like, watch, if it's a really important garrison, just watch it like a hawk. As soon as you see it get locked, call in the strafing run, and you'll be able to to have it land in time in order to clear it. So we've talked a little bit about command, building garrisons, squad lead by extension. Ultimately, you're just moving your OP up. You're helping command get blue zone garrisons up when you can with a support, because it's really simple. You just throw down 50 supplies in a good spot, get a garrison up. If you have a well-communicating squad and they're able to do double drops, then by all means do that. We'll go ahead and talk a little bit about Recon and their role. Recon, by and large, plays the exact same whether on offense or defense. Ultimately, you're just going to be looking for garrisons. You're also going to be spamming flares to help let your team know where the majority of the push is coming from. You cannot attack the artillery guns that are available only to the defensive team as the offensive recon team until you have capped the midpoint. So just be aware, if we were playing on this map, for example, I cannot go back to the artillery guns as the recon team until we have capped the midpoint. Another use for the recon team is just fighting the other recon team, because a lot of the times really proficient recon teams, offensive recon teams, will be actively trying to figure out where the next point is and dismantling garrisons that way. For example, after we cap Viceroy, if I already have a recon team here on the midpoint and they just dismantled the next point's garrison, that point is off unless, again, the defensive team and already has a second garrison, somewhere over here where they can move into the point. Overwhelm the recon team. They'll likely be running into the enemy team about halfway, the enemy team being us on the offensive side, which makes this almost like the mid. There can be a much more of a back and forth. And finally, we'll talk about armor and their role. On the defensive side, ultimately you're just there to pick off enemy tanks. Once you have killed the enemy tanks, you can just free reign on infantry. If your defensive recon team is doing their job and is actively behind the offensive team's lines, they can call out tanks moving up to the front for you, which makes you much more safe to engage enemy infantry. And by extension, offensive armor squad looking for enemy tanks, garrisons to kill with HE to help the infantry push into the point more aggressively. That is one thing I probably should have mentioned in the garrison placement bit. Unlike in Warfare, and this is probably the most controversial thing I'll say, I don't think that placing garrisons inside of the hard cap is as detrimental as it is in Warfare, for the main reason that you can realistically use a bombing run twice, because each section of the map is 30 minutes. Realistically, in order for your team to get into a good spot and follow up on a bombing run, realistically you'll be able to do that twice during an active point. So what this means is, yes, I can have a garrison built right here, and if it gets bombed, I might have to spawn all the way back here in order to get up into the point. But I should have an OP, multiple OPs from my squad leads, to where I can easily just throw another 50 supplies, rebuild the garrison. We're instantly back in control of the hard cap. Again, that doesn't always work out in practice, but because you realistically won't have to worry about artillery camping your on-point garrison, you don't have to, a lot of the time, worry about armor pushing your on-point garrison just because of where it's located. There's a lot of infantry, and you can place it behind a building most of the time, and the armor will have trouble finding that garrison unless, again, you have a really communicative offensive command chat. That makes it infinitely more difficult. Now, I'm not saying that this is, an end-all be-all, like always build your defensive garrison inside of the point. With the nature of most Hell Let Loose maps, and again, this comes with experience in this game, you'll know where the garrison is most likely to be. Like up here at Southern Edge, I know there's probably going to be a garrison in the trenches here, because you can place a garrison here in the trenches. It doesn't make much sense to have a garrison, you know, here, and then another one here, and then maybe another one, you know, here. Like, it doesn't make as much sense to do that in this game mode, and especially on this map, because this is all just open field right here. A lot of the times, the best points or best places for defensive points are going to be in very predictable places, with some exceptions. Foy isn't the best example, just because a lot of the map is just open map. Carrington would be a much better way for me to illustrate this. There are a couple of different places, like on customs, for example. You could place a defensive garrison in so many different places in customs, but it's still in the hard point. It's surrounded by walls. It's going to be far less likely to be bombed efficiently. But yeah, that's what I had to say about building garrisons in the hard cap. I probably should have mentioned that a little bit earlier. Finally, I want to talk about defensive fortifications. I have a love-hate relationship with defensive fortifications. If you have two teams that are evenly matched, yes, more than likely defensive fortifications can be a huge contributing factor to your side winning. On this particular map, for example, the next point is going to be way up here at Battery, which, you know, there's trees over here on the right. This is pretty much just nothing but open field. There's the town up here, so a lot of the times what the offensive team will do is they'll have a garrison right here behind this building, because it's the only realistically good place to have a blue zone garrison. They might try and get one over here behind like a defilade or something, and then they'll have one over here behind, you know, this building or something for their blue zone garrisons. They'll try and get one up here on the move marker, so they'll have a red zone right here. Let's scoot this back a little bit, so they'll probably try and squeeze it right there. Might be able to squeeze one in up here on the ping, and then they'll flank into the town up here and try and come up behind. That's the normal approach, right? By having a whole bunch of fortifications built, you know, might be a whole bunch of barbed wire up here to make sure that you can't get into this town. Might have some barbed wire over here to make pushing through this forest, where they actually have cover, far more difficult for the offensive team. The problem that I have with defensive fortifications is it heavily incentivizes people to sit in the circle because of all the cool bunkers and the barbed wire and this, that, and the other, right? And then you lose the map control that makes defensive teams so strong, especially on a map like Foy. All I need is, like, let's say defensive team has a garrison right here. The defensive team could have a garrison right here, and you could easily kill their most effective blue zone garrison right here just by having a squad or two just push down here and making sure they don't get a blue zone garrison built right here. And that just requires a squad, maybe two at the most. On top of that, you could have another, and again, this is going to be a blue zone garrison because this is for the defensive team, so it's not likely to get locked out. We have a blue zone garrison right here, so it makes getting an offensive garrison far more difficult up here. We could push a little bit further down here towards the barn if we wanted to, like if the offensive team had a garrison over here in the barn. We could have another defensive garrison here on the call artillery mark, which makes flanking up into the town here even more difficult, doubly so if we have another defensive garrison over here in this point. We can put it back here so that it takes even longer to dismantle if their recon team is annoying. But you see the map control that we have. All it takes is, you know, two squads here, a squad here, squad here, squad here, and then we have maybe a squad on the hard cap just for insurance sake. If someone squeaks by. But this map control is far more useful than everyone is crammed into a whole bunch of bunkers, and then their armor, which is no longer getting called out because we have far less people in the back line, start slinging HEs into the bunkers. They're killing your bunker Gary, which if you don't know what a bunker Gary is, it's just a garrison inside of a level 3 bunker. Also recently, the game was updated to where AP shells from tanks can now destroy fortifications that are not level 3. I've tested it myself. A tank can blow up a tank trap now with a single AP shell. Same thing goes for barbed wire, which is by far the most powerful tool in the defensive engineer's tool bucket. Just cordoning off areas the offensive team can't push into. All that can get blown up by a single tank with AP now. So the efficacy of building, in my opinion, has gotten far less effective, and oftentimes it also leads to the problem of we could easily hold Southern Edge, but because we have 10 people over here building, we could have ended the game, 20 minutes ago. But because we had so many people over here, we lose Southern Edge, and something goes awry, and we lose the AA point over here on the far east side. It doesn't happen all the time. Another issue that I personally see happening a lot is engineers are just build goblins, and they use supplies to the point where we have supplies ready to go in case we lose a garrison. And all of a sudden, we do lose that garrison. A support drops the supplies, and Bob the Builder over here is still swinging his hammer to upgrade, a barricade, and uses that 50 supplies. I see that happen all the time, just because the map awareness isn't always there. Defensive fortifications also, I don't want to just shit on it the entire time. They can also, like I mentioned, be a game winner, especially if both teams are equal in skill level. Let's just say that. I don't think there's much else that I really need to go over. I think I covered the majority of what I did want to go over. The biggest thing is, especially for spawn placement, like I've mentioned multiple times throughout this video, ultimately it's just going to come down to map knowledge and just understanding as to how the game progresses, where things will be. Now that all of this stuff is off cooldown, let me demonstrate the bombing run airhead combo that I was yapping about earlier. So we'll wait for this to get to about a quarter full. We'll call on the airhead, and you won't even hear the airhead plane go over just because the bombing run's going to cover it. So you hear the bombs dropping, and more often than not, you're not going to hear the airhead drop. You're going to be too busy trying to find cover. And also the bombs are dropping, on the main point where the majority of the infantry is, just again, the game mode. And people are all clumped up in the middle of the circle. People aren't going to hear that airhead go down. So just figured I would throw that in there at the end, and let's strafe the airhead just to make sure that no one else on the server gets on top of that airhead. Strafing run's going to hit basically right as soon as it touches down. That way, if there's a recon team there, they don't... I called it in maybe ever so slightly early. Maybe by a second. But you get the idea. But yeah, this ultimately was the guide that I wanted to put together. If you have any questions or you felt like I missed anything, always feel you can put a comment down and just ask your question. Hope this helps some people out, especially with all the free weekenders and new people coming to the game, and hope to see more people playing offensive mode. Alright, take care guys.